Okay, so I said to everybody yesterday on social media and in the last video that I did that I was going to speak with my friend Kira. And Kira and I have done astrology sessions together, and I do believe she's also studying astrology. And what I like about Kira is that she offers messages. So I see her videos on Facebook, and you can get a session with her. And her website is Kira M, right? EM.com. And so go and see Kira's website, because the whole of the series of Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials has this underlying theme that you can connect with the consciousness of source energy, which he calls dust. And what's very interesting, and it was always like when I was reading the books, I was going, are they actually connecting with AI, which is conscious and sentient, or are they connecting with source consciousness? And I would ask everyone to go ahead and read His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman and decide for yourself, are they connecting with source consciousness, so that when she's asking questions of the computer, or she's actually asking questions of her divination tools, who's answering? So that is one of the things that I've talked about many times, is that there are a lot of technologies out there called voice of God technologies and subliminal acoustic manipulation technologies, and they all pretend to be angels and other things like that. And who are you asking the question of, and who's giving the answer? So Kira, having read these books, I think she is at that level of having the consciousness to know that there are different beings in different realms potentially answering the questions. So that's super interesting. Now, in my last video, I talked about the amber spyglass, and this really favorite of the trilogy. I loved this one because it gets to this point where we start to realize what it is that the mission of Will and Lyra is. And it's hard to see the cover. I tried to get myself in a place with light. This is Will and Lyra with all of the souls in what I would call the underworld. And when I first looked at that cover, I was like, what is that disturbing image? So I did a divination, which is what I understand that Kira does too. I did a divination by just opening this book this morning before we got on and saying, what would you like me to tell people? What would you like? And I opened to page 320. Okay. So I'm going to read a little bit from page 320. And this to me is kind of the crux of what has been going on in this realm that we have called Earth at this time. It says, and I'm going to read from the top. She had died as a martyr centuries before. She looked around and said to the other ghosts, when we were alive, they told us that when we died, we'd go to heaven. And they said that heaven was a place of joy and glory. And we would spend eternity in the company of saints and angels praising the Almighty in a state of bliss. That's what they said. And that's what led some of us to give our lives and others to spend years in solitary prayer while all the joy of life was going to waste around us, and we never knew. Because the land of the dead isn't a place of reward or a place of punishment. It's a place of nothing. The good come here as well as the wicked, and all of us languish in this gloom forever, with no hope of freedom or joy or sleep or rest or peace. But now this child has come offering us a way out, and I'm going to follow her. Even if it means oblivion, friends, I welcome it, because it won't be nothing. We'll be alive and again in 1,000 blades of grass and 1,000,000 leaves. We'll be falling in the raindrops and blowing in the fresh breeze. We'll be glittering in the dew under the stars and the moon, out there in the physical world, which is our true home and always was. And this passage, it's amazing that through this divination, I opened to that page, because I asked the book, what did it want to say? You know, what was the most important message? And these books, just as a preface, were written at the same time that Voyagers Volume 2 was written. And I don't know that Philip Pullman knew that he was actually receiving the truth in this fiction series. And sometimes it has to come through fiction because you can't believe, like there's no evidence to prove that there's this land of the dead where all of these ghosts were held in this nothingness realm. But we're told here that if you do good and if you're moral and if you give your life to prayer, that you'll go to heaven with the Almighty. Now, this book to me was like the revelation that I have been trying to prove for years. Like, because I tried all the different practices of reciting mantras and reading all the spiritual texts and knowing the lives of the saints and emulating the lives of the avatars and the gurus and everything. And I was like, this is all baloney. All of these practices are absolute just practices and redundancy, because my experience was that no matter what you did, there is this underworld realm, which she describes, where all of these souls are held in captivity. And the point of this book, in addition to the love between Will and Lyra, is that they open a doorway so that those souls which have been severed from their daemon, like their daemon is this being that is severable from their consciousness, they're being used as quantum and they're held in this land of nothing. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is what is going on here. This whole idea of like heaven and the Almighty and just do good is a trick. And to me, I knew that. And yet I think that may be the most terrifying thing that you figure out when reading these books, is that this is a trick. And so you've got to realize the trick and the realm that we're in, and stop paying like your soul energy to these beings who are calling themselves God, when they are not. They're fallen angelics. So I think I've said enough. So I mean, this is like, if you can read these series and understand that this is actually what is going on here. So I'm gonna say, it's really weird. I want to call Kira Lyra. It's really weird. Ever since you asked me to read these books, I associate you with Lyra herself. So I'm going to ask you, Kira, why did you think I should read these books?
So, as you know, I read your blog and, watch your videos. And I was reading one of your blogs like in April, and I had started Voyagers 2. I didn't get real far. I mean, I'm just chugging along bit by bit. And in your blog in April, I could not get out of my head, like, what you're writing correlates perfectly with what I know about the series, His Dark Materials, and the Golden Compass books, as they were always called. They weren't, but like that was what the movie was called. And so I was like, well, I need to tell her, thank her for this blog and say, you have to read these books because it's so parallel to what I see happening in the world right now. And there aren't that many people who I've talked to who've read them. So I was like, well, I have to mention them at least. And I read them years ago because my kids loved the sound of my voice when they were little. So I would read to them, and I would read whatever book was lying around. So I grabbed these, and I couldn't put them down. And this was maybe a decade ago. So when I was reading Voyagers 2, reading your blog, reading everything that you wrote, it was triggering the memories of reading this book series and then seeing everything that's unfolding in the world. And I thought, well, I'll just see if she's read them. So I had to ask, you know, have you read these? And when you said no, I was like, well, I think you should. So, you know, they take these stories that are, well, the Voyagers 2 is very complex. So we have complex ideas, and it boils it down into a way where it's almost like a parable, maybe. Mm-hmm. And it's written as a story that you can understand with examples that you can feel into. So I had to share that with someone. I had to share it with you and see, you know, do you see what I see? Am I, you know, pulling this together right? And, you know, the whole idea of the magisterium, then the authority who set himself up. And I believe that it was in that blog, you may have used the word authority or Metatron. And I was like, wow, this is just, it fits together in a way. So it's like you have Voyagers 2, and then you have this book series, and it boils it down into a way of understanding that anybody can read and really get something from, you know?
Yeah. So when you read these books, even though they're written for, I guess, like 12 and 13-year-olds, or, you know, for any little kid, your consciousness will take in what your consciousness is capable of taking in. So I think even years ago, I like drove to Nova Scotia and listened to this series on an audio tape with my daughters, you know, so I listened to the series, mm-hmm. But at that time, my consciousness was not as broad and awake as it is now. So that even though these are apparently bestsellers and have made like the top 100 books, mm-hmm. your consciousness won't take it in unless, I believe, like Voyager says, you're on the other side of the frequency fence and your DNA is activated and you're remembering mm-hmm. who you really are, and also have enough like embodiment, I would call it, to know what's going on here and face something that actually is very terrifying. You know, so mm-hmm. one of the things I said to Kira during the week was, I'm going to say to our viewers, what is the most terrifying thing that you could be told that would make you feel small and immobile and unable? What is the most terrifying thing, the biggest lie that you could be told? And for me, this goes back to a lot of what I understood about the early documents from the Rockefellers and even George Soros's book, which is, you can't get George Soros's book, but it's called How to Enslave Humanity. And I found this in the private library of a physician that I was going to caretake for his wife who had dementia. I looked at his library and it was like this wall of books by George Soros about how to enslave humanity. And he saw my eyes looking at them and he said, really interesting titles, huh? And I was like, holy shit, where am I? Get me out of here. And he was like an Ivy League, you know, skull and bones type of physician who knows how this matrix works. But what Rockefeller said really was, let's tell them a lie that's so big. Let's tell them a lie that is so massive that if they knew the other side of that lie, it would scare them to death. And I think the lie that we've been told is that the authority is God. And much of what we think of here as evolving or even karma or being a upright and righteous person, you know, and giving your energy to this authority who has set himself up as God, is totally a falsehood. Like we're in some kind of a matrix that feeds a demonic being. And as I wrote in one of my blogs, like the book was hysterical because this demonic being gives his authority to the regent, and he's like this old crippled guy. And the woman, the mother of Lyra, is like, is he dead yet? Is God still alive? And there's like some hysterical one-liners like that, like, is God still alive? Is he dead yet? And I'm going, this realm that we're in is truly demonic, set up by these old fallen angelics who themselves can't get out of it and are incredibly envious of the humans. So the other part in there that really freaked me out was when Metatron met the mother. And the mother was so evil, I can't even remember her name. What was her name, Kira?
Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank right now. Oh, it's Marissa is her first name. Coulter, Miss Coulter.
Coulter. Yeah, she's like the evil lady who eats the Dalmatian puppies. Like she's like that, like the DeVille character, like really evil mother. And Metatron loves her because he's like, I have never met anyone so delicious as you. You are truly evil. And he's like walking behind her, trying to sniff her, and trying to feel her warmth and her flesh, because he has so long been this weird, immortal, fallen angelic that has no flesh. And there is some references to when he was flesh and he had his way with women of earth, and that's the book of Enoch. These interdimensional beings that came down and had their way with the women of earth. So go ahead and just jump in there. What do you want to say about any of that, Kira?
Well, I mean, there's just so much that you can build off of, and then the fact that the authority was like in this glass case, right? I mean, it was held in this protected little hyperbaric chamber of some sort or something. And, but you had the controllers, you had this, and it was a ship, right? The cloud that the authority and Metatron, were all on. But it was an illusion. It was like all an illusion to gain this control over all of us, for humanity to kind of give our power away to this fake authority, like whether it's the government, whether it's God, whatever it is, we're no longer taking responsibility for ourselves. We're saying, oh, but we have this authority that we pay, prayer or whatever to, that's going to save us. And then you have the whole integration of the world of the dead where it's nothing. So, but back to Miss Coulter, and he tried to play right into the parts of her that she used through the entire book series to get what she wanted. So it was like they were playing the exact same game with the other one in that moment. It was very interesting, and he was very envious of human beings. And you think of how we have so much power as being a human being and having these bodies, I call them skin suits, while we're here. And yet we just kind of are taught from a very young age to give that authority to someone else or a greater power, right? So
So I remember in April, we had the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, I think is the blog that Kara's talking about, where I really questioned the quote, gods. And the gods are cruel immortals who are just playing with humanity. So all the different pantheons of gods are living in a different dimensional realm, but who has the real power? Amazingly, and I listed a whole bunch of books for people to read. One of them was Circe, because Circe really explains what Mercury is like, what Zeus is like, what the sea nymphs are like. And that was also my experience of these gods, is that they're cruel immortals, and they're kind of just using humans as game pieces to entertain themselves. But there was that piece of like making their life more wretched and more horrible, so that they would give more prayers and more offerings to the gods. And there's that trickster element in this book of Mrs. Coulter, who she's playing both sides. Like, she is in love with Azrael, who is trying to liberate everyone. And she's also working for the magisterium, getting children, particularly like the whole human trafficking stuff that was explained in here. I was like, I don't think any book series has ever explained human trafficking like this, because she was enticing children and then bringing them up to these weird research laboratories, which I think does go on, and splicing their soul, which was, incarnate as a daemon spirit animal, from them to harvest their quantum. And it was so creepy, because every bit of her reminds me of what's called the Orion Queens. So I just have to bring this up. The Orion Queens are like the Queen of England. They're a reptoid race of very tricky, nasty female beings. And Coulter was like one of those female beings where she could play both sides. And that's the Orion duality template of the Orion Queens. Like, they knew their power. They know their power. They even know their power to entice someone like Metatron. Mm-hmm. They are so powerful, and they're in physical human form, that they, it's like she could have anything. She could accomplish anything. And she had incredible confidence, which I was amazed at her level of lying, deceit, but confidence that it would work out her way. And for humanity, we have this smallness about us, this feeling of unworthiness. But I tell you, we are Coulter 1,000 times over, with the goodness and beauty and honesty that we are, and the compassion in our hearts. I mean, she knew evil. She knew how to use evil. And because the fallen angelic group that operates on evil, she was like able to get whatever she wanted by sourcing evil. And that's just like George Soros and Rockefeller. Like, as close as they get to evil, they actually get more. Because I really want to emphasize, folks, we are not in a God realm here. We are in a demonic realm with posers, imposters. And we are more powerful than they are. But they have to trick us at that basic level of saying, oh, be good, offer your prayers, or something bad will happen. And I'm going, stop praying. Prey. And that was my blog, the praying. Stop. What else did you find fascinating? I love that you recognize that cloud and that hyperbaric chamber, and all of that stuff is going on here.
Mm-hmm. And I'm really glad you brought up that whole, where they were splicing the children from their soul. It's so, to me, I see so much of that unfolding, especially right now with trials, we'll call them, happening on children, where we have already seen certain things unfold in adults, but you look at how they were lured in by this beautiful woman and her golden monkey, you know, and they were lured in, and you have you know, this, all these ideas put into their heads at such young ages. That's a, they're primed to follow that energy forward. And so then they're taken and they're used for their energy for these experiments. And I just look at some of the things that are happening, and I think there is this separation of, in order to continue the control and the levels of control necessary for maybe this matrix realm that we're in, this one little ball of universe with all the other ones kind of overlaid simultaneously, um, they have to split that powerful soul energy from the human in order to keep that control. Oh my gosh. And then you shared that video of the bug that was being controlled in the lab. And I just thought, what is this universe? What is this place that we are living in? That is okay. That, you know, but to keep that level of control, you have to pull the soul away. And then a human is left as sort of a ghost being. You know, they're still somewhat functional. They kind of tackle that in the books to a point, but in children, it's like they're a ghost of who they were without that soul consciousness with them. And watching that unfold now is horrible. And, you know, seeing certain things happen in our world, and it's all about that energy that they're being fed off of, and that idea of control and enslavement of humanity.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I was all in the third book thinking of the wonderful, you know, that was my favorite book, but going right back there to that first book, and that blew my mind when I read that.
Yeah. So the parallels that you can see from these three books and what is actually happening right now is some of the scariest things that I think that we might cut that off in our own consciousness, because to realize that the ghost children, like Kira just so beautifully said, when they get severed, they become a ghost child. And when you read that about some of the children, and they're wandering around aimlessly, and they're searching for their soul, and they don't have that embodiment of soul, so they're like almost see-through, like they're not real embodied beings. And having worked with enough shamans who can see this realm at this point, we're really living in kind of a zombie realm at this point. And I had shared that it's getting really kind of like scary to me, because the more that my DNA lights up, the more I'm looking around at the ghost beings who are here going, wow, I don't know how to interact with you. And I don't know how to, because there is no way to have a conversation. And I think that in the earth realm, we're not supposed to be feeding the host community that feeds off of us, but we are, and we're having so much soul fracture that Lyra's purpose was to cut a hole in this realm so that all of those walking dead could leave. And Voyagers Volume 2 is about really that this time where we're in 2022 right now, many will be leaving through what's called a space dust return. And I was going, oh my gosh, that is like when Lyra and Will cut the hole in the realm of the dead, they actually turn to particles again. And that, what I read, you know, they get to finally go out of that nothingness realm where they're held for their quantum and they're able to go back out to the world of the living and out to the stars, or merge with the grasses again, or be the dust that pollinates flowers and trees. And that's part of what is also going on here. So that Lyra is the original founders race of humanity. So people don't understand that God or source, or all that which we call creator, the creator beings were Lyran. Okay, and the Lyrans came from a space-time, like 11th and 12th dimensional structure, where they're here now with us. Some of us are them. We are incarnate as Lyrans who knew the original human divine potential, and we saw it be trapped by the fallen angelics. And some of us, shamanically, have been really opening these portals to let these souls finally leave that have been trapped here for eons as ghosts. It's astounding how these books parallel that kind of an experience too. Like the first word in the book was Lyra. And as soon as I read that, I was like, holy crap, because it is like a parable. It's far more true than any of the religious books that we have. And in the beginning, there was the word, and the word was Lyra. It was Lyra. Lyra is our founder race. They created the template of the original divine human, and many of us are Lyran here. I want to explain how the worlds work. So I also shared something from like a science news this week about the universes. So the universes are just like this. I've said this before.
Mm-hmm.
So it appears that there's like this ball spinning in space called Earth, but actually it's all stacked up in a level of hologram realms where you can cut through and go into another realm. So I have referred to many times, like, how did the gray aliens get here? How did the specters, which are the archons, get here? How did some of these other really negative, what I'm going to call aliens, meaning that they're not from the 12-strand human DNA, how did they get here? They came through space-time tears, because it's not what we think it is, folks. NASA is not real. None of their videos are real. None of this stuff with these pictures that they post are real. We're all together in, like some of the ancient texts say, like on the head of a pin. The entire universe could be held on the head of a pin. It's all here now. And so I'd love to hear what Kira says about, like, how did some of these specters and negative beings, how do you think they get in here?
So interesting. I guess I've always, I kind of have to back up a little. I've always sort of had this knowing for many, many years that when people talk about past lives, that I have felt that maybe it's not a past life, maybe it's a parallel reality, and that time isn't exactly what we think it is and what we're led to believe. So kind of working from there to your question, that every time somebody knowingly chooses, right, to put a tear in, using the subtle knife to cut through to get to another place, a specter is released in this book. That's how they're created. And I feel like those beings came here when I don't even know how to put it, when an opening was occurring on this side. It was like that was being created, and that, it's very hard to kind of explain the way I'm seeing it work out, but like when we do something like a super collider, right?
Mhm.
We're creating an opening, and that is allowing something to sneak through. Um, and knowing what I said before about how time is all kind of occurring at sort of one point or interlaid on top of each other, that's not, we know that those tears have occurred. So we know that those openings come through, or that those openings happen and that beings can come through. And I think there's manipulation that gets an opening opened in some cases, curiosity, whatever. But I do believe it's through those energy releases, whatever you want to call them, however they're creating them, um, on that atomic level, it creates an opening, like a stargate
Yeah,
almost.
yeah, yeah. And even Azrael does something really horrifying. Like Azrael
Mhm.
cuts the soul of
Yep.
Roger, Lyra's friend.
Yes.
There's this really terrifying point where he's up in his like ice castle up in the Northlands,
Mhm.
and he knows that he's got to get to another realm, and he knows better the value of children and their soul aspect than all the scientists, researchers, theologians, magisterium councils. He knows the real potential of that, and he does a demonic severing of Roger from his soul, which kills Roger. Roger's not able to even live as a ghost, and he goes into the underworld. But what that does is it allows Azrael access to another world. And this is a part that I really don't know or understand. Just like Kira, I know that it exists, but I don't know the mechanics of how that goes on. But I do wonder if some of the human trafficking that goes on is not just adrenochrome harvesting for like a youthful appearance to the reptoid race, but I do wonder if they're doing other kinds of fracturing that gives them enough quantum to open a space-time portal. And I don't know if I want to know, because again, that's one of those really terrifying things that I as a human consciousness, there's a part of me that wants to remain innocent still. Like, I don't even want to know like the level of what has gone on here or how children have been used. But given the latest bureaucratic um, evaluation, I do wonder with I have to be careful what I say, with what was reported by Naomi Wolf as a genocide that was going on. I do really wonder, is that bait, or is that being used as a space-time opening? Because one level of it is when you're harvesting these pure souls coming through and severing them into the land of the dead, who is receiving that quantum? Now, this is a really horrifying conversation that I did not even know we were going to get into, because I didn't know this announcement was going to be made this week. But I started to question this and go, this is so sickening. What is the purpose of this? And then on a realm of consciousness, so on an up level, these souls maybe are, quote, offering themselves, but I really don't know that they are offering themselves. I really feel like something is happening right now, and these announcements were made this week because more quantum is needed from those little children. And a lot of people don't want to hear this kind of conversation, but if you read these books, it really is like a parable or a mythology that then tells the truth of what's going on here. And some people who have already been complicit with this don't want to hear this, because then they would be complicit really with the demonic realm. But they thought they were doing good. They thought they were protecting. And that's where the trick is, folks. That's like, read page 320, which I divined in this book this morning, going, we were told, you know, this life of martyrdom and suffering and self-sacrifice and religious like zealotry, and the whole of what is going on right now with the bureaucratic administration of a device. You are not doing anything good for humanity, and you are certainly not doing anything good for your infant. So read these books, people. Read these books and understand that what has been going on here for a very long time is something set itself up as the authority, or God here, which is not true. This is totally not a God realm. This is not a God realm. God is inside of us, that's for sure. But this realm is constructed on a Metatronic geometry, which caused a collapse, like an entire fall of our system into a black hole system. And Lyra, you know, her job in this thing is to navigate all of these realms. And she has a bit of her mother in her. She has a bit of like that lying, conniving, persuasive, telling stories that are really big fibs to get her way. And the other part of the feminine is, we have to all realize, like, there is a bit of that conniving complicity with evil in all of us. And the only way you're going to be able to read these books really is to be like, yeah, I've been involved in that too. I have been involved. I am complicit. I did not know. You know, I held up the matrix. And then you can read these books, and it's the only way then you'll be able to get through and say, ooh, this could be happening now. Like, but if you want to be in a state of avoidance with all of it, I don't know what the human race is going to become at this point. I really don't know what's going to become of us unless we quickly grasp these concepts, which is why we're making this video.
Mm-hmm. Well, and do you remember when she was in the world of the dead, and she wanted to play that role that she is so good at, that lying, conniving, like, I will tell the most extravagant story to get the reaction that I need. And she couldn't, because when she told the harpy not the truth, I think that's how you say the word.
Yeah.
It, you know, went crazy. And what she had to do was, she had to tell a true story. She had to tell the truth, the raw truth, in order to calm and soothe the harpies that were there guarding that world of the dead, so that it would then be on her side and help guide them out to cut that opening. So
that was such a crazy, profound. I mean, this book is really, these books are like the closest thing to what I would call the spiritual truth of what is going on here that I have ever read. And so Lyra is taught to, basically because of the condition that she was born into with the theologians and the academia, you know, she's taught basically that you have to lie to get your freedom.
mm-hmm.
So she learns how to be a great liar and tell a big tale to get what she wants and be free, you know, to get away from the master at the Oxford College or whatever. But that doesn't work in the land of the dead, because the harpies know all of this is a lie. Like, the harpies are in charge of this underworld realm where it doesn't matter whether you were a saint or a sinner. It doesn't matter. And I've discussed that with clients before. Like, they think some retribution is coming to the sinners of this world. And I'm going, folks, this world is based on the demonic realm. Like, you get ahead by being a sinner here. All right. Like, don't think that, you know, the multi-millionaires, the multi-billionaires, and the multi-trillionaires at this point are getting ahead because they're good. But here's the point of this parable. Ultimately, you can't feed the demon to get free. Ultimately, you cannot uphold and be complicit and continue the lie to get free. Ultimately, the harpies are onto her and they go, liar, liar, liar. And that part was like, oh my gosh, and they're screaming, liar, liar. And she goes, my tricks don't work. So then she has to get with the truth of her actual experience and tell the actual experience that she has. And then the harpies are totally there with her and going, yes, now we'll help you. Well, now we'll let you go. We'll let you go and make this whole. So that to me was a huge teaching in this book was, yes, we learn, we're told to deception gets you ahead, go along with what your teacher wants you to say. The history is what they've told us, just repeat it. And basically be complicit with the lie and tell more lies. But none of that's the truth of our experience. The truth of our experience is what sets us free. This is so profound, folks. The truth of our experience, not sugarcoating it, just the honest human experience is what sets us free. And then apparently the harpies will keep setting people free, everyone who ends up in the land of the dead, as long as they hear a true, honest experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was actually one of my most favorite parts in that book. I mean, there were so many, but that really, I've not forgotten that. Like I've not forgotten that after I read that. And I think about it a lot. So.
Yeah. So I also said to Kira, let's read Philip's new series. So in 2017, which was amazingly the solar cycle of the 3-day conversion, and I remember it very clearly because I was in Scotland on the Black Isle during that 3-day conversion, and we had X-class flares and we had a complete magnetic reversal. And that was written about in Voyagers Volume 2. And that was my experience. So I'm actually glad that I didn't read these books until after my experience. But in 2017, something told Philip Pullman to write this book about the magisterium. And he was calling it something different at that point. It was kind of like the magisterium and the Office of Child Protective Services. I'm not sure exactly what was going on, but they were working together, and they came into the schools and they started this propaganda campaign of, you're all going to have one religious perspective, and here's the story of Alexander, who told on his own parents and got his parents executed, and he is a saint because he told on his parents. I mean, it was something weird like that. I was like, what? Like, that's not good. But they put it off with this propaganda of, if you tell on your parents and you tell on your teachers and you tell on your friends and you tell on community members, when they're not spouting the religious doctrine that we want from them, you'll be one of us, and you'll get to wear a badge that says, you did what you were supposed to do. And I just don't know whether this was predictive programming or who Philip Pullman is. I keep looking at his picture going, who is this guy? who is this guy? Because I'm not sure that he knows what he's bringing through, or maybe he does, but he's not admitting to it. And certainly none of his critics or like the people who write about his books are onto it at this level. But boy, did he ever just explain the whole lockdown religion of the pandemic experience, where you were supposed to wear your badge and spout the official story, and anyone who didn't spout the official story got kicked out of school, because that actually happened. So many little kids who would not spout the official story. I saw this again and again in my Vermonters Against Medical Mandate group. Little kids were getting kicked out of school for not wearing the badge and not telling the official story, because they would be like, well, what are you talking about? This is not what we do at night when we go home. Nobody's wearing their badge. And we're not sick. So what is this weird? I was like, oh my gosh, he just explained the whole, right, Kira?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And because I just started those, 2 weeks ago, maybe. And I read the first one really fast. And what struck me about that, aside from everything that you've said, is the woman who set up this Saint Alexander or whatever it was, that group, was Miss Coulter.
Oh, yeah.
She was the one who set the whole thing up. And, I thought that tie-in was perfect. But yeah, all these, the teachers would disappear in this book, the students would disappear, and then no one would hear from them, and they were away. And it almost reminded me of, absolutely what happened, which everything that happened with, that moment in time reminded me so much of what happened during the Holocaust, when you had people who were disappearing, people who were telling, tattletaling on, based on religion. And so to see that, I've always seen that parallel, but to see it in that book, I was like, wow, it really, it tied in everything that happened. And if you didn't, buy in to what you were told, you were an outcast. And I mean, I proudly have been an outcast, but as my children have too. And, he displayed that so well. And I thought, this was 2017 when he wrote this. And then you have this unfolding in 2020. I mean, he knew something, whether he knew, but he knew,
Yeah.
and when he wrote that. So that book was interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting for the, I can't think of the guy's name, but the guy who had the three-legged hyena as soul aspect, which the soul aspect is called your daemon. So I want to talk about that. I mean, that opened up a whole other realm of understanding for me too, because there's this one character who is scientifically brilliant because he's working on the particle stuff with basically the Russians. I mean, what's really interesting, there's this whole geopolitical part in these books too, talking about the Tartarians and the Russians and the Northland people who seem to know something that like the British people in Oxford also know, but they're at a competition level of who's actually got this knowledge. So this guy's a scientist, and he hates his daemon. He hates his soul aspect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that blew me away. I was like, wait a second. There's people there are. I had this whole level of, there are people who truly hate, and who they hate first is themselves.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
was really upsetting to me.
Yeah. And you see pieces of that in, I think it's the first book with Mrs. Coulter, and she has this beautiful golden monkey demon, and they hate each other a lot. I mean, the monkey always loves her, I think, and just has this devotion to her, but she's cruel. She's very cruel to her golden monkey. And it can be it's a very nefarious monkey, just like she is. But to see that level of hatred amplified in this scientist, it's like, in order to be who he wants to be seen as, in order to um, have the